Hi guys. So today's video is essentially going to be an extension of the video I made where I played music inspired by the Mistborn trilogy and specifically inspired by the characters Vin and Kelsier. In a way, this video is sort of going to be like a character analysis of those two individual characters, but I promise I won't spoil anything for those of you who haven't read the books. It's just going to be kind of a behind the scenes, behind the music, to give you an idea of why I chose certain phrases or certain octaves or something of that sort, why I made those decisions and how those decisions I feel kind of reflect those characters. Getting into the story and the characters first, Mistborn, the very first Mistborn, is about this society where instead of the individual who everybody thought was the chosen one winning, it was the Dark One that won. It was the Dark Lord that won. And so we're 1,000 years into what would the world look like if the person that all the prophecies said would be victorious. What would the world look like if that person lost? As you can imagine, the world doesn't look great. As a result, there are essentially two classes of people. There are the people known as the Ska, who are slaves, for lack of a better word, and then there are the nobility, and that's it. There's not really an in-between, and there's a group of individuals. Some are known as Mistings, some are known as Mistborn, which are people that have these magical abilities that have to do with ingesting metals, and this particular group of people has decided they've had enough. They need to finally do something to take out the Lord Ruler. The most notable of these individuals would be a man named Kelsier. He is filled with hope, he is filled with optimism. He has been through some of the worst circumstances, but he has still come out of it wanting to do what he can to free the Ska people. Another notable character is Vin, and she kind of gets taken under Kelsier's wing. He teaches her how to use her abilities, how to use her magical powers, and together they form this bond that is somewhat like a mentor bond, but also almost a father-daughter bond. And while Kelsier is filled with hope and optimism, Vin is very skeptical, and she has extreme trust issues. She has lived a very difficult life. She has lived as a result of being part of the Ska population, and she's been a street urchin. Getting into how I tried to portray all of this through the actual music itself, I'm going to refer to the various panels as 1, 2, 3, and 4, so that way if I'm discussing any individual part, it's easier to explain which one I'm talking about. Panel 1 is the first that comes in, and this particular one is supposed to sort of represent Kelsier's optimism. This particular rhythmic figure never goes away throughout the entire piece. There is one time at the end of the first phrase that we have a long note, and then at the very end of the piece we have a long note. But otherwise, that rhythmic figure stays exactly the same throughout the entire piece. And I did this intentionally because Kelsier is the kind of character that never loses hope. He never gives up. Going along with that, I also wanted the rhythmic figure to consist heavily of offbeats, because the idea of offbeats in general is that you're just a little off the main beat, and I feel like that represents Kelsier's character so well, whether you mean literally in music his part is off the beat or just his personality. I just think that the idea of it being off the beat reflects him perfectly. I also just find that offbeats tend to have this sense of pushing forward, and so for those of you who are not knowledgeable when it comes to music at all, I'm sure the idea of offbeats makes perfect sense to you, but I'm gonna treat you like you're a total idiot for a second and just show what I mean by that. So if this is the main beat, the offbeat would be da 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 da. The tone of the books, though, is not necessarily an optimistic one. So even though Kelsier has optimism, the overall tone is pretty dark, and there is a lot of grit in the story, which is where the second figure comes in that lines up pretty well with Kelsier's part, but it's short and it's abrupt and it is really low, and it's kind of a mix of different notes. The third panel is supposed to represent Vin, and when we first are getting her part, it is somewhat somber, and it doesn't clash with Kelsier's though. It's just not quite the same. So Kelsier's has this sense of optimism, and it sounds almost cheerful, and then Vin's part comes in, and it has a little bit of reservation, a little bit of sadness to it. But pretty quickly, the part kind of comes into its own, and I just feel that the high notes on violin really can soar above all the other things, and I just think that that is so indicative of what Vin is capable of. really wanted the notes to be high. Vin's I thought would be fitting to be higher because she's a female, but not only that, she's kind of got two different personalities throughout the book. Because the society is broken up into ska and nobility, that is kind of a reflection of Vin's character, where she is sort of caught between these two different worlds. In order to try and break the system down, they also have to try to kind of infiltrate the nobility, and she's finding that there are parts of her personality that fit within both of those things. So the high notes are sort of supposed to be the high society, but going along with the other part of her personality is where the fourth part comes in. Vin can also be extremely gritty, and this bottom part that comes in, I think, is very much that. It also pushes things forward a lot, because in the beginning it's Kelsier that's pushing things forward, and then when Vin finally comes into her own, I think she starts to really propel things forward as well. And I really wanted this bottom part to fit perfectly with Kelsier. So those offbeats that Kelsier had before, the other part, it's within the beat, because I think that fits more of Vin's personality. It's just this, but the accents fall where Kelsier's notes change, so it's, which is, I think, much easier for you to see and hear than it is for me to just like clap frantically at you. So I'll let you hear it for yourself. In the middle of the piece, panel 4 and panel 2, we kind of lose those parts, and that was also done intentionally, because there are moments in the book, of course, where they're dealing with something very difficult and they're going to face some tragedy, and they are at times, most of them, especially Vin, going to think that it's impossible and that they're going to lose hope. And so within those sections, the notes start to stretch out. We lose that sense of momentum from those parts, and they just kind of become somber and sad. The notes are also fairly dissonant in this section, and that's because notes that would normally change together or change at a point where it would sound nice to change, sometimes certain notes would carry over, and then there would be this sense of you want the resolution, you want the notes to come together and fit together nicely, but they don't, which kind of gives a bit of angst and sort of discomfort. However, the one thing that we don't lose is Kelsier's part. Even though it starts to sort of get buried and we start to not really hear his part as well, it's always there. Eventually, everything comes back around. The panel 4 part comes back in with the gritty movement that it had before. Panel 2, however, does start to shift slightly. Before, it was sort of that abrupt, darker, harsh sound, and that starts to change, because while the world is harsh, Vin, whose part finally gets to start to soar again in panel 3, her part starts to line up with panel 2, and that was intentional. I don't want to give away exactly why, but it's sort of an idea of being more in control and facing your path with more certainty. Basically it, though. I had so much fun making this piece. Of course, though, a huge thank you to the artists that let me use their work in the music video, because I just thought that their artwork is so stunning, and it really brought the music to life so much more than it would be if you were just like staring at me playing away. And then a huge thank you to all of you for all of your continued support, for all of the kind words that you said about the video. For those of you who are and aren't fans of Mistborn, you were still so kind and so nice, and I really, really appreciate that. If you're interested in seeing my other bookish music inspired videos, I'll have the link to the little playlist right over here. And then if you would like to see more Brandon Sanderson stuff, I'll link my Sanderson playlist as well. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.